Guys, so today we are going to be talking about animal rights activism through the lens of psychology. My name is Arjun, also known as Arjunius. You can scan this if you want to find out more about me on socials. So the agenda for today, we're going to just give a little introduction about who I am, and then talk about some just basic psychology and how we can apply it to activism, and then kind of get into more like modern techniques of applying activism in your day-to-day life. And then we'll just kind of end it off with a Q&A at the end. All right. So by a raise of hand, how many? I know there's some of you guys that are vegans, there's some of you guys that are transitioning to vegan, but how many of you guys are animal rights activists or it's aspiring animal rights activists? Okay, so we got quite a few of you guys. All right, so this will be an interesting talk for you guys because I have a unique take on it. All right. So I've been an animal rights activist for about 8 years. Like I said, I was a vegan for 10 years, so I've been doing it for quite some time. I'm also a social media educator. I like using educator, not influencer. So a little bit about my credentials. I did a bachelor's in biological sciences at University of California, Irvine, and I did cognitive psychology. Then I would do my master's in psychology at USC. Hey, all right, so listen, guys, even though I went to your UCLA's rival school, I think UCLA is a great school. Like, UCLA is really prestigious, and you guys should, all be proud of yourselves for coming here and, making it out here and getting accepted. It's a big feature. Like, you guys are doing great. But USC is way better, so just don't eat them. All right. So I'm also the author of a book called Wisdom Through Psychology, which I wrote after I graduated USC with my master's notes and just my journal notes. I kind of synthesized a lot of lessons I had learned and kind of fused it with psychology. And the book is basically just about how to get some of the top renowned principles of psychology and applying it to your life, right? In your health, in your wealth, in your relationships, how you talk to people. So that kind of helps a little bit with activism, I think, in my opinion, just knowing a little bit about psychology. But before we get into psychology, let's talk about what activism exactly is, right? For you aspiring activists. So the definition of activism is simply just any efforts to promote, impede, direct, or intervene in social, political, economic, or environmental reform with the desire to make changes in society towards a perceived good. Okay, so first of all, it's basically any effort that's going to create an impact toward that perceived good, right? So activism can be basically anything, right? It could be something as small as doing a social media post, and it could be something as big as a campaign for a march around the world, right? So as long as it's an effort that's promoting this ideal, it can be considered activism, right? So a lot of people traditionally will view activism as stuff on the streets, right? So I used to do a lot of street activism. This is me doing a march in San Diego. This is me doing outreach for Anonymous for the Voiceless in Santa Monica and Hollywood. How many of you guys are familiar with Anonymous for the Voiceless? Okay, so you guys know what Anonymous for the Voiceless is. So have you guys ever been to an Anonymous for the Voiceless Cube of Truth? I know my sister has. 1, 2, okay, cool. Oh, you guys are doing it Anonymous for the Voiceless on campus. Attempting, okay, good.
They kind of pulled out on the last day.
Was it legal reasons?
No, it's just scheduling stuff and also.
Oh, okay.
But I've been in contact with them. We're planning one for next quarter.
Okay, well, cool. So do you guys know what the Socratic questioning method is? So with Anonymous for the Voiceless, a lot of the conversations are based off the Socratic questioning method. So real quick, just to give you an overview, it's actually really, really effective. And not just AV, but for just having conversations with your friends, having conversations with your family, having conversations in public in general. So the Socratic questioning method essentially is getting the other person to come to the truth themselves, right? Because the truth can be a lot more powerful when the individual self realizes it versus you telling them the truth. And I'm sure you've seen when people weaponize the truth, right? They like yell at them and say, hey, you're wrong, I'm right, blah, 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 blah. Now you might actually be right, but they just might not actualize the truth because it's not coming from their own thoughts. It's coming from your thoughts, and they're already putting themselves on a, they have their defenses up. So basically how the Socratic method goes is you just question them. You don't give them answers, you don't tell them anything, you question them, but you're directing the conversation to get them to the answer. So for example, a conversation could typically go like this. Have you ever considered not consuming animal products and using vegan products? I don't know, something general like that. And then they might say, I have, but I don't feel like it. Well, do you know what happens to animals? Oh, I do. It's really horrible what they do in factory farms, but I just love meat. Really? Why do you like meat? Right. So again, questions. You're not judging them. You're not saying anything, just questions. Why do you like meat? Oh, I like it because it gives me protein. Really? Can you get protein from plants? I don't think so. Well, where do the animals get the protein from? Well, I guess they get it from plants. Boom. You just planted a seed there, because now they came to that realization themselves, and now they're going to start questioning their whole reality, because now they're going to be like, wait a second. I just questioned my entire moral compass right to its core, right? So that's what the Socratic questioning method is there for. And once you guys do your AVs, if the leader's there, they might teach you how to do it. But that's very, very powerful for just activism in general. It could be outside of Anonymous for the Voices Cubes, right? So that is that, right? Now let's get it. So that was just some philosophy. I just kind of went on a tangent there. But let's get into some actual psychology, right? So this is, how many of you guys, well, the definition's right there. Fundamental attribution error, right, is something I think is very important to know what it is before you guys even have these conversations, before you guys even create your own form of activism maybe in the future. So the fundamental attribution error states, and it's also known as the correspondence bias, if you know what that is, it states that people underestimate situational and external factors concerning the behavior of others, but overestimate their own when they're judging themselves, right? So basically people are like, in general, quick to judge others, but they're a little bit slower to judge themselves under the same rubric that they're judging other people in, right? So this kind of distorts the communication. It makes it a little bit difficult to understand where someone's really coming from, because generally, if people knew better, they would do better, right? And you might think that they should do better because you're telling them what's better, but they might not have had the same situational factors, the same external factors that led them to where you were, right? So for some of us, it was watching a documentary. Some of us, it was having a conversation. Some of us, it was getting guilt tripped, right? So it depends on the situational factors of that individual and their personality, because every person's personality has a totally different language that's going to persuade them. So that's something very important just to take into account when you are doing these outreaches and having and doing your own activism, right? The fundamental attribution error. All right, let's talk communication. This is super, super important. And you might think that, well, I could communicate. I could speak English pretty well. Like, communication, what's the big deal? Communication is not just language, guys. Communication is a skill. All right, day 19 of my book, I state miscommunication and lack of communication are the roots of most of our problems, and I stand by that. So, if you think about it, even something as small as a cell, right? If a cell's like regulatory genes cannot communicate with the rest of the cell to stop the replication because there's too many cells around it and it just keeps growing, what happens? Cancer. A huge problem, and that's all attributed to the cell's miscommunication with the other cells. Something as microscopic as that, if it has a communication error, is going to cause cancer. Now, if you think in the macro sense, right, like stuff with us, with humans, with relationships, for example, say that Jeremy was joking around with his friend and he made a joke, but he got offended. He's like, I don't like how your orange looks. It looks like shit or some shit. He's like, and he gets offended. But you were just trying to make a joke. That's miscommunication. It's like, no. I just meant it as a joke. Like your food looks fine, but I was just like, whatever. Or it could be something like, like your girlfriend gets mad at you because you didn't text her or something. So she thinks that you're ignoring her, but you were just busy. That's lack of communication. So you see how most of your problems can be attributed to just communication error, right? So that's important to understand when you're having conversations with people, that being a skilled communicator, not just communicating, basically. Being a skilled communicator is very, very important, right? So as a rule of thumb, knowing how to articulate, getting your debate skills up, and getting your emotional intelligence up is going to make you master communication, right? And basically, all communication is making your intent match your impact, right? A lot of people are just concerned with their intent. Oh, that wasn't my intent. I didn't mean to say that. But you got to look at what your impact is, right? If your intent was to get this person to try, I don't know, vegan cheese or something like that, but now they're like, oh, you know, F you, whatever. You got to look at the impact, and you got to analyze, why did this impact happen? What variables led to this impact? And when you start thinking like that, you're going to start to understand that the communication has so many different variables that you were not accounting for that led to the impact, right? So it's kind of like just taking accountability for, like, how did this impact occur, and how can I match it with what intent I have, right? So moving along, if we can. All right, so I'm going to ask you guys a question. What % of communication do you think is words? English, Punjabi, Hindi, Spanish. What % of communication do you think is just our words? Anyone? 25? 60? Come on, Bruins.
It's going to be something
It's going to be the little one.
7% of most human communication is just words. That's our artificial language that we've created, right? Words. Now, 38% is paralanguage. What's paralanguage? That's your tone, that's your pitch, that's your loudness. Paralanguage makes up 38% of your communication, believe it or not. And this big chunk right here, which you probably can guess, is body language, right? Your facial expressions, your body posture, your hand gestures. Right, so for an example, I can come up here and just say, hey guys, vegan meat is a lot better than animal-based meats. Versus, hey guys, vegan meat is so much better than animal-based meats. I just said the exact same words, but I use a different paralanguage and I'd use a different body language. Do you see how that makes a little bit of a difference? Right? So that's just something very important to note when you guys are having conversations, when you're doing activism, when you're debating, right? Just knowing that you need to focus. I mean, obviously you got to focus on your words too, but having a big emphasis on your body language and your paralanguage to make your case a little bit more convincing. Right? And this, by the way, this is natural language, right? So like when you talk with like other animals, right, like your dog, they don't know what you're actually saying. They're looking at your body language and your pitch, right? So they hear how you sound, they hear how you look, they see if you're friendly or if you're like a predator. They're reading your body language and paralanguage. So that's like the natural communication that most animals actually communicate through. Words is actually very, very artificial, even though that's what we're trained our whole life to be. We're like, oh, we're an English speaker, we're a Spanish speaker, but that's a very small percentage of how we actually communicate. All right, so I know I threw a lot at you guys, so we're just like about halfway there, or halfway through the presentation. I just want to pause here. If there's any questions, comments, concerns. Yes, I saw your hand first.
I have more of a general question on communication. Like, what if you feel like you know that communication may help, but like you might be hesitant to do because you don't know if you're going to communicate right, or it might not solve the issue, or like it might make it worse, and like it's kind of scary to like start a conversation about like how you feel or how someone's like affecting you.
Right. So I was going to talk about this later, but I would study a little bit more like neuro-linguistic programming. That's like kind of teaches you like dynamics between how your behaviors, actions, and thoughts all like kind of connect together and create a outcome. But to be honest, like you could study, but I think one of the best ways to communicate is just practice, right? I mean, this is the old cliche, practice makes perfect. So if you just put yourself into the fire, go to these AVs, go have a conversation with someone, practice, and then also analyze, right? If you can somehow record yourself talking and kind of like have like one of your friends, look at you and ask them for feedback and say, how could I have said this better? How could I have created the impact that I wanted and make it match my intent? Being able to analyze yourself talking is actually very, very powerful. So definitely practice, right? But then also look at what you need improvements on, because it's hard for me to like generally tell you what to improve on, because there's like a dozen different variables, and your case might be very, very unique. So the only person that's going to know where your improvements can be is going to be you, and that's going to be through watching, yourself talk, I guess. I think you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question about the pie chart. I don't know what year the study was conducted, but do you think the normalization of like texting and like actually looking at words like on screens and online, so like phone calls, has changed the percentage of words, or things like emojis and like capitalization and little exclamation marks? That's like a new paralanguage almost if you look at.
That's a really interesting point. I think that it's not technically paralanguage, but actually, I feel like it's like a mix of both, because the emojis can kind of evoke like an emotion that the words are trying to say, right? And you can kind of like deduce that, all right, when he has like all capital letters, it must be loudness. So it's a type of paralanguage, but I think paralanguage is more like visually seeing it or hearing it. But I guess through like emojis, that's actually an interesting case. It could definitely impact the message itself, because you can kind of predict like, what does this emoji mean? It's evoking this emotion, it's evoking that emotion. So yeah, that's a great question.
When I first started started making an MLR activist, I was definitely very angry, so I went to YouTube comments, and I think there I like learned, oh, these are the kind of comments I need to write, like this is how I should be phrasing my words, and like how it needs to look visual, like when do I use an exclamation point, when do I capitalize things? So I'm wondering, I feel like that's also an interesting form of communication I've noticed in animal rights spheres. I see a lot of comment arguing all the time everywhere.
Yeah, and to be honest, like most of like the debating and stuff, like you see it in the comment section, right? It's hardly ever on the streets, because people are just like a little like shy to do it in person, but like on TikTok and Instagram, they'll just like go all out. So yeah, it's definitely something to keep in mind and account for when you are reading these comments online, because like you said, there is some paralanguage within like these emojis and exclamation marks, and how they might have like LOL, LLL, like multiple letters. Like it evokes an emotion. It's just kind of like evolved that way. I think you had a question?
So back to like attribution bias, would that be like, oh, this person isn't vegan because they don't care about animals, but I'm not vegan because I don't have time to cook, or X, Y, Z. Is that like the correct reading of that, and how would we use the knowledge of that bias?
So it's basically understanding that everyone comes from different walks of life, and the things that convinced you to go vegan might not have convinced them to go vegan, right? Just like everyone has their own like language of understanding, their own love language. So the variables basically that led this person to become who they are going to be completely different than what you went through, right? So if I show everyone Gary Yourofsky's speech, which is what made me go vegan, it might not make everyone go vegan, but it made me go vegan. But that's because I have a different personality than all of you guys. I have different circumstances I was raised under. So that's just something to account for, that because some people get like so like convinced that everything that made me go vegan is going to make every single one of you guys go vegan. Everything that made me how I am made you guys. It can potentially make you guys, but that's not always the case. So that's the error that a lot of people make. To understand someone's personality, their religious background, their belief system, their philosophy, and kind of work from there and backtrack it, because that's how they're going to come to their own self-realization of the truth. So that's basically what fundamental attribution error is. Any other questions? All right, so now let's get into the psychology of why humans eat meat. So the first one's pretty obvious, right? Most people will consume meat because, number one, they're comfortable and they're conforming, right? It's about the self-image. They don't want to stand out. They don't want to look like an outlier. They don't want to look like they're part of this minority of people that are like, doing some new age hippie dippy whatever thing. They want to just conform to the majority, right? That's what they want to do. So that's the first most common reason of why humans eat meat. The second is misinformation and marketing, right? The dairy and meat industry is really, really good at spreading a bunch of misinformation, right? Why are they spreading conflicting studies and conflicting information? Because when people are confused, they will consume. When people are confused, they're going to keep consuming, because they're just like, well, I don't know if I can get all my protein from plants. Maybe I'll just eat the meat just in case. Maybe I'll just consume dairy just in case, because everyone else is doing it. So when there's misinformation and confusion, they're just going to do what the majority of people are doing, right? And I think it's really just a fear-based campaign, right? As long as you keep people afraid, as long as you keep people confused, they're going to keep consuming, right? It's just like an emotional buy. It's like, okay, well if I don't drink milk, I'm not going to have like calcium in my bones. If I don't eat meat, I'm not going to have protein. So it's like they're afraid that they might not look a certain way, they might not live, they might die, or whatever it is. So they're trying to purposefully create this misinformation. And the other aspect of it is just marketing, right? Marketing is a big part of the meat and dairy industry. In fact, the people that created the Got Milk campaign, they had one of the most successful marketing campaigns, that they have like their own master class, right, on the app, and they're just teaching people how to market because they're like the most qualified people in the world. So it just goes to show how powerful their marketing tactics are. And it definitely, influences public opinion. It influences the government. It influences what we're going to see out there, which takes me to convenience, right? You go down the street, you can see a KFC in this corner, you'll see a Chick-fil-A, you'll see all these fast food spots, but you won't see like apples and oranges being sold on the street, right? So it's like, the whole system has created a very convenient way of buying meat and dairy products so that people can keep consuming, right? So convenience is the third thing. And the fourth thing is defense mechanisms from cognitive dissonance, right? What's cognitive dissonance? Anyone know? Some brave hand right here. You can take a guess, it's fine.
Yeah, like choosing to ignore something and like be ignorant of it.
Sure, yeah, that's one definition.
When your values don't align with your actions.
Aha, when your values are not aligned with action. You were going to say something?
I was just going to say when a person has like conflicting thoughts or ideas.
Yeah, kind of a mix of all of them. So cognitive dissonance is basically when you start to realize that your own belief systems are not aligning with your actions, right? And that creates what? Stress. That's the dissonance part of it. It creates stress in the individual, usually subconsciously, because they haven't put it into their conscious yet to realize what they're doing is incorrect, right? So what happens when they have a cognitive dissonance and they realize that what they're doing is not correct? Defense mechanisms. What do defense mechanisms do? What do they protect? They protect the ego, right? Because the ego is addicted to being right. It does not want to be wrong. It does not want to look stupid. It wants to look cool. It wants to be correct always. So these defense mechanisms show up as denial, right? They show up as rationalizations. They show up as trolling too, right? As I'm sure you'll see YouTube comments. People will troll because it's a defense mechanism to protect their ego, because they're using humor as a way to alleviate all the stress that's coming from the cognitive dissonance, right? So these are all important things to just keep in mind on why people will consume meat, so that you can kind of understand where they're coming from and not make the fundamental attribution error. Any questions on this before we move on? I know this is a lot. All right, cool. So now let's get into consumer psychology. All right, so this is something, I don't know why a lot of other vegans and activists don't talk about this enough, but I feel like consumer psychology is so big within the whole movement itself, because the entire problem with meat and dairy products is that people are consuming it, right? Which is leading to animal cruelty, which is leading to your health being bad, detriment to the planet. And the whole solution with veganism is that they're creating all these vegan alternatives for people to consume, right? So understanding consumer psychology, I think, is like very vital, just from the whole marketing and psychology standpoint, right? So firstly, we need to understand how consumption works via the adoption curve. So this is the adoption curve matrix. So I know this is a lot, but let's break it down one by one. So right here, we have the innovators, right? So whenever there's a product, whenever there's a new technology, whenever there's a revolution, whenever there's something new that's being introduced to society, this is generally the flow of how adoption works for that product, right? So if there's a vegan milk that just got released, vegan meat that just got released, this is how it looks like, right? Starts off with the innovators, right? These guys are, very like eager to try new things. They're very like experimental, but they only make up 2.5% of the population. Then after the innovators, you get the early adopters, right? These guys are typically like, they follow the innovators, but they're a little bit more, they can realize the potential benefits of this new product. Early adopters make up about this 13.5% of the population, right? And now after the innovators and the early adopters have adopted it, you enter this phase called the chasm. All right, so the chasm is when it's about to just hit the mainstream, when it's about to have that snowball effect and go all the way up, right, and become normalized. And it starts off with the early majority, right? The early majority will usually like adopt a product once it's been tested just a little bit, and they see the benefit, right? And that's 34% of the people, right? And once it hits the early majority, it very, very quickly goes into the late majority. And the late majority are only going to adopt this product. They're only going to consume the product once it's been pretty well established by these three guys, right? And after the late majority, which is 34%, then it gets into the laggards. That's 16%. The laggards are like the skeptical people, the conservatives. They're very traditionally minded. They're very like resistant to change. They hate new stuff. And they're only going to adopt a new product. They're only going to consume something. They're only going to be part of a revolution if they absolutely have to, because now they're the minority and the majority is on a different type of product, on a different type of consumption, right? So, and notice, laggards are 16%, innovators are 2.5%. So this isn't a bell-shaped curve that's symmetrical. This starts off with a very small group over here, and then it gets bigger and bigger. So, kind of integrating this all into animal rights activism. What I always tell people, as an activist, some people get overwhelmed, like, oh, how are we going to, like, you know, free every cage in the world? Realistically, the best and most effective means is to focus on these guys right here, right? If you focus on this innovators and these early adopters, you hit the chasm, right? And you hit the mainstream. And generally speaking, every single revolution throughout history, only about 8 to 15% of people, right? And this is like about, what, 15%? 8 to 15% of people had to adopt that revolutionary idea in order for the activists to kind of chill out and for that idea to kind of have a snowball effect. So this is just something to keep in mind when it comes to adoption. There's already some, like, I mean, if you think about it, like vegan products like almond milk. Almond milk's like way past, like, you know, the chasm. It's probably like up here. It's pretty worldwide. If you travel anywhere, Europe, South America, Asia, almond milk is everywhere. But it's just the other products that slowly follow this adoption curve matrix and get into the mainstream and hit the laggards. So, any questions here? Yes?
So you mentioned that this doesn't only apply to individual products, but also for revolutionary movements. Could you list some examples of those things that fell into that 8 to 15% range in the past?
I don't have the examples at the top of my head, to be honest, but you could. I'm sure you can look it up. This applies more so for like product consumption, right? But a lot of revolutions that like have a product that they're trying to like get them to consume, right? Like if it's like a brand new soda or something,
okay.
That type of revolution. It's not like human.
Things, not like
yes.
50% of people believe in gay marriage, then it'll be legal.
Yeah, so I should be a little bit more specific. This isn't like all like rights organizations and everything like that. This is for consumption, right? This is specifically for consumption of like technology, of products, of services. So revolutions that have to do with consumption, like veganism, that have an aspect of consumption in them, that's what this is applicable for. Question?
Actually, the last slide, can I ask it now or should I wait?
You can ask it now.
Okay. I'm wondering, like, do you, so like a lot of the products we're seeing in the vegan space right now, there's a lot of oversaturation happening. Do you think that level of oversaturation, like in inter-competition, like sets us back in the challenge? Like, or do you think it propels us forward?
I think it propels us forward, because if you think about it, I mean, you look at the meat and dairy industry, right? The parallel. They have a lot of meat products. They have a lot of beef products. They have a lot of different companies promoting different things. And it's actually good that there's a lot of different companies, because if there's a little bit of healthy competition with like vegan cheeses, for example, you eventually get them to kind of work for a much more refined product. Versus if, say, it was only Daiya cheese on the market and no other vegan cheese is going to compete with them, then that might be the only option people have. But when people have more options, it's more so about the consumers, right? About who's consuming what. It's not so much about which company is going to win and have the most money. So when there's actually a lot of vegan companies out there, people have more choices. They're like, okay, I might get Beyond Meat, or I might get the bean burger, or I might get this burger. So the more options there are, the more consumers actually will consume that entire like type of product, because now they're like, okay, I got options. I can like play around with different tastes and different types. So it's actually good for the movement, for sure. It's not probably good for the companies, because the companies, like, individually, they're not going to make money because there's a lot of competition, but it forces these companies to make an even better product because they have to compete so well, right? Yeah, great question. All right, so let's talk about demand activism, right? So in general, the more demand you have of a product, the more supply increases. But there is a little sweet spot here, right, with supply and demand. You guys are familiar with supply and demand, right? You guys have all taken econ. All right, cool. I'm not going to get into that too much then. So demand activism is something I don't think it's like formally like a type of activism, but I kind of like, me and like some of my friends have kind of just done it. We kind of just made it up. And it started off with a story about cookies. Once upon a time, I just walk into a Stater Brothers, right? And I'm like, yo, do you guys have vegan cookies? And this lady's just looking at me like, what is a vegan cookie? Like, is that like non-dairy? I'm like, yeah, like it's like you guys don't have cookies? It's like, no, like we don't. We just never had a demand for it. I was like, what? So then I'm like, just the gaslighting her reality. I'm like, so you guys don't have almond flour cookies? You don't have chocolate chip vegan cookies? You don't have peanut butter vegan? Like, you don't have any of those? And then she's just looking at me like, oh my God, I didn't know there's so many of them. Like, I guess we don't. No. I leave her. I just, planted a seed. Come back the next week. I ask her again. I'm like, hey, do you guys have vegan cookies? Just to see what her response is going to be. And then she just starts laughing at me. She's like, oh, here comes the cookie monster or whatever, right? It's funny. She was like 5'2". I'm like, 6'1". I'm just looking at her like, do you guys have vegan cookies? And she's just like she thought I was joking, right? But every week I would just come ask her for it. I even told my sister, like, come in and just ask them for vegan cookies for no reason. Lo and behold, just a month later, I'm at Stater Brothers. Suddenly there's vegan cookies. There's vegan brownies. I didn't even ask for that. There's vegan pies. There's vegan. There's just a bunch of random shit. I'm like, dude, how did this happen? Like, how did this happen? So I was like, I know I was asking the manager like every week. I was persistent with it. I was persistent with my demand, right? And lo and behold, there's a bunch of vegan products everywhere. I was so excited, except that I was on a diet that day, so I didn't buy any of it. But it did sell out. It did sell out. Like, a lot of people bought it. And I realized something. If you just put the products in front of people, even if there's just one guy demanding it, people will buy it because they'll be like, oh, I heard about veganism. Oh, this looks pretty healthy. Oh, this looks pretty cool. Some people aren't going to fully commit to veganism, but if you put that product in front of them, they will buy it, right? So it was a very interesting experiment that I saw. And it would like literally sell out. Like, I was like getting mad at one point. I'm like, dude, like, where's all the cookies? Like, they're gone. Like, again, I was asking her. I was like, dude, order more. So demand activism is something you could do locally, right? This is very easy. You just go to like, I don't know, whatever cafe. What's a cafe that's nearby here? Lazy Daisy. You guys can go one by one, ask for like Lazy Daisy vegan food or something, and eventually create that, right? So demand activism, I mean, it's not like you're not demanding, you're not like yelling at them and interrogating them. Like, you're just asking it. You're letting the managers know that there are consumers, there's customers that actually want this product, because that's probably the most direct way of doing it, right? The whole point of activism is doing that, right? We're trying to get companies to realize that we want to consume vegan alternatives because we don't want to support animal cruelty. But I think one of the most effective ways you could do it is just locally, right? You could just go to all these companies that you're going to, tell the manager or find out who's ordering all the food there, and tell them that, hey, do you guys have vegan donuts? Hey, do you guys have vegan this, vegan that? And if you're persistent, they actually might do it. They might bring it in. And who knows, people actually might be waiting for that to happen. They might not ask them, but once they see it in front of their face, they might be like, okay, I'll try this. And that's how you can kind of, create that demand. So I call that demand activism, right? Totally made that up. All right, so there's a lot of different types of activism, right? Besides demand activism, these are things you might be more familiar with. Traditional stuff, boycotting, street activism like marches, disruptions, vigils, protests. We have artivism. This is actually one of my favorite types of activism. You guys know what artivism is? Yeah, it's like combining art with activism, right? So music, movies, poetry, documentaries, crafts, painting, and then of course you can use your voice, like public speaking, rallies, writing. But there is a type of medium that kind of combines everything together. And I think with, specifically with our modern age, social media can kind of integrate everything together because you can kind of televise all these types of activisms happening all at once, right? And I mean, it's really up to you, like what you choose to do. I'm not saying social media is like the number one thing to do, but depending on your skill set, right? Now that we've talked about how to communicate, now that we've talked about how consumer psychology works, you got to kind of read your own skill set. You got to see what you are good at and what type of division you might be best suited for. So it's really up to you. But personally, I would think that social media is probably one of the most powerful and most engaging ones, because the father of media psychology once said, the medium is the message. Have you guys ever heard of that before? The medium is the message. So what does that mean? The medium is the message means that the medium in which the information is transcoded through is actually more significant than the message itself, which is a little weird. But if you think about it, if you see in a newspaper and it says some news about, Beyond Burgers have just been released, versus seeing it in like a Instagram reel, Beyond Burgers have just been released. It's the same information, but it's in two different mediums. One might be a bit more engaging, one might be a little bit more stimulating, one might be a little bit more impactful at getting that information across, even though it was the exact same message, right? So understanding that the medium in which you communicate through is very, very important, and sometimes more significant than the actual information that you're trying to say. So it's something to just keep in mind. And it's not that social media is the best. It might be, in 10 years, social media is dead, and now it's like some VR app that everyone's on. I don't know, Black Mirror, right? So it's just something to keep in mind. Times change, but the medium is definitely much more significant than the actual message itself, right? So let's talk about, right, the medium of information is really, really important, and it's linked to emotional depth, right? So the more emotions a medium can instill in people, the more engaging it's going to be, right? Because by definition, if you have a lot of emotions going on in your brain, you're going to remember that, right? If there's a lot of regions in your brain being activated, you're going to remember what that person told you. You're going to remember what that person's talking about, right? So emotions is really good at getting you to remember things. It's good for your attention, it's good for your learning, memory, and reasoning. It's all tied into that. So knowing how to use emotions, right? Using your pathos in your language, in your communication, in your activism is very, very impactful in influencing people and persuading people, right? Pretty simple. And just kind of like to example how I kind of go about it, this is like a little gallery of, or my IG gallery, right? So I always tell people, like, if you have a message, you want to paint it with a lot of different emotions, right? You want to paint it with a palette of different emotions. I mean, some people will be like, oh, be happy. But like, there's some activists out there, like the vegan teacher, that's always happy, right? Have you guys seen the vegan teacher, right? She's like, hey guys, be happy and nice to animals. It's like, it's a little too cheesy, right? You can't do cheesy. We're vegans. We can't do that, right? So you wanna think like an artist, right? Your job is to kind of provoke people with emotions. You want to kind of have the audience go through a lot of different emotions, right? You might want to be happy in some videos. You might want to be interesting. You might want to be fun. You might want to be creepy a little bit. You might want to be entertaining. You might want to be inspirational. You want to go through a lot of different emotions because it can activate different regions in people's brains, and people can remember that information a little bit better, right? So it's important to just think of like I said, like you're an artist. You're trying to paint a picture with a lot of different colors, not just one color, not just one emotion. You want to have a variety of diverse concepts and ideals so it kind of gets translated better, right? And if you think about it, like the job of an artist is to kind of alter people's perceptions, right? So you want the world to see reality through a different set of lens. And how do you do that? You got to provoke people's emotions, right? So that's also something to keep in mind if you do choose to go that route. Or, I know some of you guys already are doing that route, but it's just something to kind of add to your inventory. So that is all I have for you guys. So are there any questions? This is my socials. I think I saw your hand or someone's hand go up. No? Okay. Cool. All right. Yes?
Yeah, so back to the adoption curve. So veganism right now in America is sitting around like 5%. So we're kind of just out of the innovators and the early adopters. It's like, how does that change the way we approach outreach or the way that we engage with people if we are no longer just in the innovators but are now reaching the early adopters?
Well, I would argue we're still kind of on the innovators and like we're still in the early phases of it. There are some products that have made it to the mainstream, but like getting the concept of, you know, consuming majority vegan products and consuming cruelty-free products, that's the tough part. Because if you think about it, I don't know where I read this, but it was like 92% of all vegan meat is consumed by meat eaters, not vegans, right? So there's people that are interested in buying vegan food, but it's not specifically cruelty-free products. That's like the main thing. Once it's like cruelty-free, then it's just like, it's not about being plant-based. It's not about just vegan just because it's trendy. It's about the actual animal rights movement, right? So that's like the main products that would kind of need to pass that chasm phase for it to kind of snowball that revolution. Make sense? Yes?
How can consumer psychology work with behavioral economics? Like plant-based like default, for example. Like how? Because I don't think I've ever seen that really acknowledged as much in behavioral economic spaces. So what do you think? How could that help?
Well, I think with it's kind of linked together because consumer psychology is about how humans consume products, right? And if you really just think about the basics of it, that is a type of behavior that we're doing, right? And it's kind of like looking at like how I was explaining the reasons why people consume meat. Those are the behaviors. So it's like we got to look at what they're consuming and then the behavior economics of like what causes them to behave in a way that's going to make them want to consume that product or want to consume a product that's ethical, that's not ethical, and what they're looking at, right? So like when they buy a product, for example, are they looking at if it's tested on certain things? Are they looking at if it's just going to be cheap? Are they looking at, you know, what are all the variables that go into their mind that allows them to behave in that way and go to the store and buy that? So it's like looking at the whole like story of like how they go from like their house to the car to Target to buy this and come back. So it's like analyzing that entire behavior can be important, I think, and just understanding how, you know.
Lay the groundwork.
Yeah, exactly. Because like I was talking about, like if you go down the street, most people will buy KFC because it's convenient, right? If there was like a vegan KFC in front of their faces and they're not even vegan, they might actually go for that if it was like a well-established brand. So it's like looking at how people behave. I mean, research has already kind of showed us the answer. It's just based off of convenience, based off of tradition, based off of, you know, what's going to make them feel comfortable. So that's kind of what behavioral economics has like already kind of showed us. Yeah. Good question. Yes.
I thought it was cool that you brought up Marshall McLuhan's like the medium is the message.
Yeah.
But you know that's often used as kind of a critique of social media, right? Because like you think of a newspaper, like people read a newspaper to be informed, right? So the media and the message, it's like a good medium for informing people because it's a long, kind of like a long bunch of text. Whereas social media is like people go on it to be entertained, people go on it to like connect with their friends, and veganism is kind of a maybe like it requires a more longer form kind of dialogue with someone because there's all this misinformation and stuff. So like how do you see social media as like a good medium for veganism?
You're right, like social media primarily is for entertainment, but I think that most people on social media, like unless you're watching long form content like on YouTube, they want to first be entertained, right? And after they're entertained, then you kind of earn the right to educate them. And after you can educate them, you might inspire them, right? So it kind of follows that pattern. First you entertain, then you educate, and then you inform, right? So it's integrated into the platform's like format, right? You can't just all be boring professors on social media because people aren't gonna, you know, they'll just scroll past it. They want to see something engaging. So I think there is a way, and there's a lot of, I guess, like activists and like content creators that are starting to integrate it in the social media way, where they kind of make it, you know, funny, engaging, entertaining, and then they kind of like leads into the educational aspect of it, or they at least point toward it, or they link it. Or it could be that you have like the more educational content somewhere else, like on YouTube, and you're kind of just like pulling people in from these entertaining videos. So there's a lot of ways to go about it, but I do think that you're right. It is primarily entertainment, but the entertainment can be used as a tool to get to the second phase, which is education. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question about psychology. I was wondering, do you think that like your academic background in psychology like really helps you with like your personal life, your relationships, and your activism, or do you think like that can be replicated by like research online or reading books without like studying psychology properly?
100%. 100%. You could do either way. I personally, it's been both. It started with school. Like I learned about certain things like media psychology, and I was just like, whoa, this is interesting. And then after college, I would read up on it by myself. So it's a little bit of both. I think for me personally, I mean, it's different for everyone. Me personally, like, university introduced me to a lot of these concepts, and then I kind of just went on to like read about it by myself when I'm bored, or just like look at my notes and just be like, all right, I want to like dig more into this. So I think it's both, and it also depends on your attitude, because I do recall some classmates that were just in it to get their A and leave, and did not remember or retain any information. So it depends on what your goal is, because if you really like take it seriously, you'll retain it. You'll remember it for the rest of your life. But if you're just doing it for like your GPA or to get a job or whatever, you're probably going to forget about it. So it really depends on where your mind is when you're learning this information. Because if you think about it, when you're reading the same exact information on your computer screen at home, you just might be more interested versus in a classroom where you're just a little tired, you're hungover because you're partying too hard. You might be in a different mood when you're in a classroom versus when you're in your room. But it's the same information, right? It goes back to that. It's the same exact information, but it's being communicated through different mediums. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
Your background is very like psychology and cognitive psychology kind of based. So what made you go into like animal activism from there? And what made you think that like that would be a good combination?
So actually, I wasn't really planning on like integrating psychology, to be honest. It was just like I was in the animal rights, movement community for 8 years, like I said, and I just noticed that there were some ways to kind of better make it more efficient and improve it. And I think once you're like if you've been a vegan or an animal rights activist for long enough, you kind of start seeing that in like everything you study. So it doesn't have to be psychology. It might be a major that you guys are studying right now, and you're starting to see some parallels with how it can improve the movement, or how you can bring your own personality, your own knowledge, and your own skill set into the movement. So it's really just me personally, I learned this stuff. How do I apply it to my personal life? How do I apply it to my activism? How do I apply it to everything, right? So that's kind of how I integrated it to just, animal rights. Yeah, but it's not just specifically psychology. It could be with any subject. Any other questions? Yes, Sia.
How do you, in the most like brief, short, like summarizing way, like what's the most like?
No, that's it. That's the answer.
No, like okay, like for example, if you're talking to people that like justify meat eating with tradition or religion as such, something that their culture has been doing for 2,000 years, what's like your answer to that?
Well, my answer has always been like we've been doing a lot of things for thousands of years, right? We've been killing each other for thousands of years. We've been stealing shit for thousands of years, and traditions are basically just, it's kind of like a religion where it's an answer without questioning, right? I always encourage people to question traditions, because traditions also evolve, right, with time. So traditions aren't always traditional. They change. They change a lot, and depending on the times, it can have different moral implications. So that's my long answer to your short requested answer. All right. Any other questions? Yeah.
How do you like choose like the characters that you put on in like your content?
So to be honest, like it goes back to like your skill set, right? So it's like if you know a lot about pop culture, if you know a lot about superheroes, I kind of integrate that into like my craft. I think primarily just showing people that animal rights activists are kind of like modern superheroes, right? Because Americans love worshiping superheroes, as you know, right? But it's like when it comes to like vigilantes, when it comes to actual animal rights activists or any activists in general, kind of showing that like resemblance that they're actually fighting for a cause bigger than themselves, and kind of relating that to like lines from the Dark Knight trilogy or something like that. I think it resonates with some people that like understand like the the mythologies and like the actual like movies, comics, and whatnot. So I think there's a very specific target audience for that, but it's also just entertaining, right? So it goes back to social media. Social media, you can't be a boring professor. You got to be a little bit of you got to engage people somehow. So I think cosplays is just something I just do for fun. Yeah. So yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, I got a question for you guys. And whoever gets this question right can get this. All right, so what is the highest percentage of how humans communicate? Like what was that? Yes, I saw your hand. Body language. Correct. That was too easy.
Are there more cultures?
No, unfortunately. I might have stickers. I don't know, but
Next month I'm loading it.
Next week I'm learning.
oh, I do. I have stickers.
I do too. I have birthday.
From
It's book illustrated.
which one?
So this isn't actually, it's not like Earthling Ed's book. It's not about veganism, but you'll notice there's a lot of like suggestions and subtle hints toward veganism. It's kind of like priming people's minds to question their morality and their traditions and comfort. So that's kind of what the book is for.